Everything just exploded. Not trended, not whispered, not allegedly discussed. Exploded. Because what started as a quiet, behind-the-scenes situation has now turned into one of the most shocking, uncomfortable, and downright chaotic celebrity scandals we've seen in a long time. And it didn't ease its way into the spotlight. It detonated. Because the moment that accusation dropped, Mendeecee's pointing directly at Tamar Braxton, the internet didn't just react, it fractured. This wasn't cheating gossip. This wasn't messy reality TV drama. This was something deeper. More personal. More dangerous. An accusation that doesn't just damage reputations. It stains them. And here's what makes this even more disturbing. This didn't come from a blogger. It didn't come from an anonymous source. It came from him. Directly. Publicly. With zero warning. And Tamar. She didn't even see it coming. Sources say the moment she found out wasn't dramatic, it was chilling. Phone blowing up. Messages flooding in. People asking questions she didn't even understand yet. And then she saw it. Her name. Attached to something so serious, so invasive, that it instantly shifted the entire narrative. Not just about her. About everyone involved. Because once a claim like that is said out loud, it doesn't matter if it's true or false. The damage starts immediately. And here's where it gets even more explosive. This didn't happen in a calm setting. It didn't come out in a controlled interview. It slipped out. Under pressure. In a moment where Mendeecee was already being cornered, already being questioned, already losing control of the story. And instead of stopping at the cheating, he went further. Much further. Too far. Because according to insiders, the second that accusation left his mouth, people in the room knew instantly, this wasn't just a mistake. This was escalation. An escalation like that always has a reason. Now here's the part no one was ready for. Yandy didn't defend him. She didn't soften it. She didn't step in to protect him. She went the other direction. Fast. Hard. And personal. Because according to people close to the situation, Yandy wasn't just angry about the cheating. She was furious about how far he went to explain it. Because cheating. That's damage you can try to fix. But dragging someone into something this serious. That's a line you don't uncross. And Tamar. She went silent. Not confused. Not defensive. Silent. And if you know Tamar, that's when things get dangerous. Because Tamar doesn't stay quiet when she's wronged. Unless she's thinking. Unless she's calculating. Unless she's preparing. And according to insiders, that's exactly what she's doing. Because behind the scenes, this situation is already spiraling into something much bigger than one accusation. We're talking leaked messages. Private conversations. People in Mendeecee's circle quietly distancing themselves. And whispers, loud whispers, that this accusation may not be what it looks like. Because the more people start digging, the more one question keeps coming up. Why would he say that? Not just say it, but say it like that. Because there's a difference between telling the truth and throwing something out there to shift attention. And right now, that line is getting very blurry. Especially after what reportedly surfaced next. Because according to multiple insiders, there are messages. Not between Tamar and Mendeecee's, but between Mendeecee's and someone else. Messages that suggest he may have been worried about something long before Tamar's name was ever involved. Messages that, if they come out, could flip this entire situation upside down. And if that happens, this won't just be messy. It will be catastrophic. Because suddenly, the question won't be what Tamar did. It will be what Mendeecee was trying to hide. And trust me, once that door opens, there's no closing it. The moment that accusation hit the air, it didn't just spread, it detonated across every corner of the internet like a controlled explosion that suddenly went off script. Because people weren't just reacting, they were choosing sides instantly. And that's when everything started moving too fast for anyone to control. Sources say Tamar didn't respond publicly right away, but behind the scenes, it was chaos. Her phone reportedly didn't stop vibrating for hours. Friends, industry contacts, people she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly checking in, not out of concern, but curiosity. Because when a claim like that gets attached to your name, people don't ask if it's true first. They react first. And Tamar knew that. According to insiders, the first thing she said when she fully processed what was being said about her wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Why would he do that? Not deny it. Not defend herself immediately. Question him. Because from her perspective, this didn't just feel false. It felt intentional. And that detail matters. Because while the public was still trying to catch up to what was even being alleged, Tamar was already asking the bigger question. What does he gain from saying this? And that's when the timeline started getting pulled apart. Because according to multiple sources close to the situation, Mendeecee didn't just casually mention Tamar. He said it in a moment where he was already being pressed. Pressed about cheating. Pressed about timelines. Pressed about inconsistencies that weren't adding up. And instead of clarifying those details, he introduced something new. Something shocking enough to hijack the entire conversation. And just like that, the focus shifted. From him to her. Now here's where it gets even more intense. Because Tamar didn't just sit there and take it. She started digging. Quietly. Strategically. According to insiders, Tamar began reaching out to people who were present during that moment, people who actually heard how the accusation came out. And what she allegedly found didn't match how it was being repeated online. Because sources say the original moment wasn't confident. It wasn't clear. It was messy. Hesitant. Almost like something said under pressure rather than something being stated as fact. And that detail changes everything. Because now the question isn't just what was said. It's how it was said. And more importantly, why it was said right then. But Tamar didn't stop there. Because the deeper she went, the more uncomfortable the situation became. According to insiders, she started hearing whispers about Mendeecee's behavior long before her name ever entered the picture. Not rumors. Patterns. Patterns of late-night disappearances. Patterns of stories that didn't line up. Patterns of conversations that ended abruptly when certain questions were asked. And suddenly, the accusation started looking less like a revelation and more like a redirect. Now let's talk about Yandy. Because while all of this was unfolding, her reaction wasn't just surprising, it was explosive in a completely different way. According to people close to her, Yandy didn't just confront Mendeecee. She dismantled him. Not publicly at first. Privately. Where it hurts more. Sources say the moment she heard what he said about Tamar, she didn't ask for clarification. She demanded explanation. Why would you say something like that? Why would you escalate it? Why would you attach something that's serious to someone else when you're already being called out? And the answer she allegedly got wasn't clear, wasn't direct, wasn't even consistent. Which only made things worse. Because according to insiders, Mendeecee began shifting his tone depending on who he was talking to. To some people, he sounded defensive. To others, he sounded dismissive. And to a few, he sounded nervous. And that last detail is what caught everyone's attention. Because nervous doesn't come from confidence. It comes from pressure. Now here's where things take a sharp turn. Because while Tamar was gathering information, and Yandy was confronting him behind closed doors, something started circulating that no one expected. Audio. Not officially released. Not publicly confirmed. But described in detail by multiple sources who claimed to have heard it. And according to those descriptions, Mendeecee didn't sound certain. He sounded scattered. Talking fast. Jumping between points. Trying to explain himself without actually explaining anything. And at one point, this is the part that keeps coming up, he allegedly said something that made people freeze. I didn't say it like that. Now think about that. Because that's not denial. That's repositioning. That's someone realizing how something sounded after it was already out. And when that detail reached Tamar, according to insiders, her entire approach changed. Because now, she wasn't just dealing with an accusation. She was dealing with a narrative that was shifting in real time. And that's dangerous. Because once a story starts moving like that, it becomes almost impossible to control. Now here's the twist that no one saw coming. Because while Tamar was trying to understand how her name got pulled into this, and Yandy was trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't, someone else entered the conversation. Quietly, but significantly. Funky Dineva. And the moment his name started circulating in connection to this situation, everything got heavier. Because people who know how he operates know one thing. He doesn't insert himself unless he already knows something. According to whispers, Funky had been sitting on information for a while. Not just about Tamar. Not just about Mendeecee. But about interactions that had never been fully explained publicly. And when word got out that he might speak, the energy shifted instantly. Because now, this wasn't just one person's word against another. This was about potential confirmation. Or contradiction. And either one would blow this wide open. Now back to Tamar. Because while all of this noise was building around her, she made a decision. She wasn't going to respond emotionally. She wasn't going to jump online and argue. She wasn't going to give people a moment they could twist. Instead, she started documenting everything. Every message. Every call. Every version of the story being told. Because according to insiders, Tamar understands something most people don't. In situations like this, receipts matter more than reactions. And she's preparing for that moment. The moment where she doesn't just deny the accusation. She dismantles it. Piece by piece. But before she could even get to that point, something else surfaced. Something that made everyone pause. Because according to multiple sources, there are messages. Not between Tamar and Mendeecee, but between Mendeecee and another woman. Messages that allegedly go back further than anyone expected. Messages that suggest this situation didn't start with Tamar. And definitely didn't end with her. And if those messages are real, then the entire narrative shifts again. Because now, this isn't about one accusation. It's about a pattern. And Tamar, she's seen enough patterns already. Because one specific detail from those messages, one line that keeps getting repeated by insiders, is what made her realize something that changes everything. Something that suggests this accusation was never meant to tell the truth. It was meant to bury it. That one line from those messages didn't just raise eyebrows, it froze the entire situation in place. Because it didn't mention Tamar. Not once. Instead, it pointed somewhere else entirely. And that's what made it dangerous. According to insiders who claimed to have seen or heard about the messages, the tone wasn't defensive, it was familiar. Comfortable. The kind of comfort that only comes from repetition. From history. From behavior that didn't start yesterday, and wasn't ending anytime soon. And buried in that thread was a sentence that changed everything. I told you I handled it before. I'll handle it again. Not dramatic. Not emotional. But loaded. Because that one sentence suggested this wasn't new territory. This wasn't a one-time scare. This was something that had already happened. More than once. And Tamar. She locked in on that immediately. Because if that message is real, then the timeline everyone's been arguing about doesn't even matter. Because Tamar wouldn't be the beginning. She wouldn't even be the center. She would be the distraction. Now let that settle. Because while the internet was still debating whether Tamar was telling the truth, or Mendeecee's was exposing something real, this message was quietly pointing to a completely different narrative. One where Mendeecee's had already been dealing with issues long before Tamar's name ever came up. And if that's true, then the accusation wasn't just reckless. It was strategic. Now here's where things start spiraling fast. Because once that message began circulating privately, people started connecting dots that had been ignored before. Old rumors. Old whispers. Stories that never made it public, but never fully disappeared either. According to multiple sources, there had been concerns in Mendeecee's circle long before this situation ever exploded. Concerns about his lifestyle. Concerns about his choices. Concerns that were quietly handled, quietly dismissed, or quietly buried. And suddenly, Tamar's name being thrown into the mix didn't look like coincidence anymore. It looked like cover. Now back to Yandy. Because this is where her reaction shifts from anger to clarity. According to insiders, Yandy didn't just hear about the message, she confronted him with it. Directly. No emotion. No build-up. Just one question. What did you mean by again? And what happened next? Is what reportedly changed everything between them. Because according to those familiar with the conversation, Mendeecee's didn't answer clearly. He deflected. Changed the subject. Tried to reframe the context. But he didn't deny it. And that silence. That hesitation. It told Yandy more than any explanation could. Because now, this wasn't about Tamar. This wasn't even about cheating anymore. This was about history. A history she may not have fully known. And that realization. It didn't just hurt. It shifted her entire position. According to insiders, Yandy went cold. Not loud. Not emotional. Cold. The kind of cold that comes when someone stops trying to fix something and starts trying to understand it. Because in that moment, she reportedly realized something terrifying. If he could say something like that about Tamar, and if this message suggested a pattern, then what else had he been saying? What else had he been hiding? And more importantly, what else was about to come out? Now here's where the internet catches up. Because while all of this was unfolding privately, public speculation started getting sharper. More specific. People weren't just arguing anymore. They were analyzing. Breaking down clips. Rewatching interviews. Comparing statements. And noticing something strange. Mendeecee's story kept shifting. Subtly. but noticeably. In one version, the accusation sounded direct. In another, it sounded implied. In another, it sounded like something taken out of context. And that inconsistency lit a fire online. Because people can handle scandal. They can even handle messy truth. But inconsistency, that's what makes people dig. And dig they did. Because not long after, another alleged detail surfaced. Voice notes. Again, not publicly released, but described in detail by multiple insiders. And according to those descriptions, the tone was different from before. Less defensive. More urgent. At one point, Mendeecee allegedly says, "They are going to twist this." Now on the surface, that sounds like someone worried about being misunderstood. But in context, with everything else circulating, it sounded like someone realizing something had already gone too far. And when Tamar heard about that, she didn't react publicly. But behind the scenes, everything changed. Because now, she wasn't just dealing with an accusation. She was watching a narrative collapse in real time. And according to insiders, Tamar made a quiet decision at that point. She wasn't going to chase the story anymore. She was going to let it unfold. Because when stories start contradicting themselves, they expose themselves. And Tamar knew that. Now here's where things take another sharp turn. Because just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get more intense, another name started circulating more aggressively. Funky Dineva. But this time, it wasn't just whispers. It was anticipation. Because according to multiple sources, Funky had been approached, asked, encouraged to speak. And his response wasn't no. But it wasn't yes either. It was something far more unsettling. Let them keep talking. That sentence alone sent shockwaves. Because it suggested one thing. He already knew where this was going. And he didn't need to rush it. Now back to Yandy. Because while the public was spiraling, her situation was becoming more personal by the hour. According to insiders, she had another confrontation with Mendeecee. But this time, it wasn't about Tamar. It wasn't about the accusation. It was about truth. She reportedly asked him, "Is there anything else I don't know?" And the pause that followed was longer than before. Long enough to confirm what she feared. Because silence like that doesn't come from clarity. It comes from calculation. And that's when everything shifted permanently. Because from that moment on, Yandy stopped defending him completely. No more explanations. No more standing beside him publicly. No more trying to control how this looked. Instead, she stepped back. And that silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Now here's where Tamar's position becomes even more powerful. Because while everyone else is reacting, she's preparing. According to insiders, Tamar has compiled everything. The timeline, the conversations, the contradictions, and most importantly, the context. Because context is what changes everything. And Tamar understands that better than anyone. Because when she finally speaks, it won't be emotional. It won't be reactive. It will be precise. And that's what has people nervous. Because there's one more detail. One more piece of information that hasn't surfaced publicly yet. But insiders keep hinting at it. A second message. A different conversation. One that doesn't just suggest a pattern. It confirms intent. And if that message comes out, the question won't be whether Tamar was telling the truth. It will be why she was ever blamed in the first place. And that's the moment everyone is bracing for. Because once that drops, this entire story doesn't just shift. It flips. That second message is what turned this entire situation from messy into dangerous. Because unlike everything else, rumors, voice notes, shifting stories, this one didn't feel like interpretation. It felt like intent. According to insiders who claimed to have seen it, this wasn't a vague conversation. It was direct, clear, and impossible to misunderstand. And buried inside that exchange was a line that made everything stop. Just don't let her find out how long it's been. Not Tamar. Not Yandy. Someone else. Someone who, according to sources, had been part of this pattern long before any of this became public. And that one sentence. It didn't just suggest overlap. It confirmed duration. Because now, the question isn't what happened recently. It's how long has this really been going on? And Tamar. The moment she heard about that message, everything inside has shifted from defense to clarity. Because now, she wasn't just being accused. She was being used. Used as a shield. Used as a distraction. Used as the loudest name in a situation that clearly had deeper roots. And according to insiders, that realization made her angrier than anything else. Not the accusation. Not the public dragging. The manipulation. Because in Tamar's words, reported by someone close to her, "You don't throw my name on something that didn't start with me." Now here's where everything reaches a breaking point. Because Tamar didn't keep that realization quiet. Not completely. She didn't go live. She didn't post a rant. But she did something far more strategic. She started letting people know that she knows. Subtle at first. Liking certain comments. Ignoring others. Responding privately to a few key people. And according to insiders, the message she was sending wasn't defensive. It was a warning. Because Tamar wasn't preparing to argue. She was preparing to expose. Now back to Yandy. Because this is where her position becomes crystal clear. According to sources, once that second message reached her circle, something inside her closed. Completely. Because now, the situation wasn't about betrayal in the moment. It was about deception over time. And that's a different kind of damage. Insiders say Yandy had one final conversation with Mendeecee. No yelling. No tears. Just one question. How long? And the answer she got wasn't a number. It wasn't a timeline. It was another deflection. Another attempt to soften something that clearly couldn't be softened anymore. And that's when Yandy reportedly made her decision. Not publicly. Not dramatically. But internally. She stopped believing him. And once that happens, there's no going back. Now here's where the outside world starts catching up again. Because the energy online shifted fast. People stopped arguing about Tamar. Stopped debating the accusation. And started focusing on Mendeecee's. His words. His inconsistencies. His reactions. Because once those message rumors gained traction, the narrative flipped. Completely. Suddenly, Tamar wasn't the center of suspicion anymore. She was the center of sympathy. And that shift hit hard. Because now, the same internet that was questioning her was questioning him. And they weren't holding back. Clips resurfaced. Old interviews. Moments where his stories didn't quite align. Times where he avoided direct answers. And when people started lining those moments up, a pattern emerged. Not just of behavior, but of deflection. And Tamar. She watched it happen in real time. According to insiders, she didn't celebrate. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt validated. Because the truth wasn't being handed to her. It was revealing itself. Exactly how she knew it would. Now here's where things get even more intense. Because Funky Dineva still hadn't spoken. But according to multiple sources, he didn't need to. Because everything he allegedly knew was already starting to surface through other people. And that's what made this moment so volatile. Because now, it wasn't about one voice exposing something. It was about multiple pieces aligning. Naturally. Organically. In a way that couldn't easily be dismissed. And that's when the pressure on Mendeecee's became unbearable. According to insiders, his behavior changed. More erratic. More reactive. Posting, then deleting. Responding, then going silent. Trying to regain control of a narrative that had already slipped too far. And every move he made only added fuel. Because when someone looks unstable, people assume there's something to hide. Now back to Tamar. Because while all of this chaos was building around her, she made a final decision. She wasn't going to rush. She wasn't going to react emotionally. She was going to wait. Because according to insiders, Tamar understands something most people don't. Timing is everything. And right now, the truth is still unfolding. Piece by piece. Without her needing to say a word. But here's the part that has everyone on edge. Because Tamar hasn't used everything she has. Not yet. Those messages. Only parts have been described. Not released. Not fully exposed. And Tamar. She has access to more. Which means one thing. This story isn't finished. Not even close. Because if Tamar decides to release everything, every message, every timeline, every contradiction she's been tracking, there will be no room left for interpretation. No room left for deflection. No room left for anyone to rewrite what happened. And that's the moment everyone is waiting for. Or fearing. Because once that happens, this doesn't stay a scandal. It becomes exposure. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that doesn't get cleaned up with statements or apologies. The kind that sticks. And the scariest part, according to one insider, Tamar is closer than ever to making that move. Because recently, she allegedly said something that changed the energy completely. I stayed quiet long enough. That's not frustration. That's finality. And when someone reaches that point, they don't hold back. So now, everything is sitting on a knife's edge. Yandy is silent, but watching. Funky is quiet, but aware. Mendeecee is reacting, but losing control. And Tamar. She's preparing. Because the next move won't be emotional. It won't be messy. It will be calculated. And when it happens, it won't just answer questions. It will end them. Completely. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just another messy headline you scroll past and forget. This is one of those stories that keeps unfolding, even when everyone involved tries to go quiet. Because right now, we are sitting in the most dangerous moment of all, the pause before the truth fully drops. And you can feel it. Something bigger is coming. More messages. More receipts. More voices that haven't spoken yet, but might. So now I need to hear from you. Do you think this accusation was ever real, or was it a calculated move to shift the spotlight? Do you believe Tamar was targeted, or is there still more we don't know? And what about Yandy? Do you think she's finally done protecting him, or is she just waiting for the right moment to respond? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now, because this situation is evolving fast, and the more people start connecting the dots, the harder it becomes for anything to stay hidden. And don't just watch from the sidelines. Because when the next piece of this story drops, and it will, you do not want to be late. Make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications immediately. Because when those full messages surface, when someone finally breaks their silence, when everything gets exposed in real time, you'll want to be here the second it happens. Stay locked in. This isn't over.